Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm so excited to be chatting with Mike Hollingsworth. Welcome, Mike.
Greetings and salutations.
So excited to chat with you about your career. So, to start, Mike, I wanted to ask you about where you went to school to study animation.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different experience or origin story, as we would say, I guess, in storytelling and I don't know, entertainment in general. I did not really go to college. So there's like a clean version that I tell people when they ask me this question is that, I just graduated high school, started doing stand-up comedy in San Francisco, and then basically parlayed that into a career in animation that led to BoJack. Of course, the truth is that I took a little bit of college, but I grew up in the Bay Area and I applied to this San Francisco Academy of Art, and I remember going in and showing them my artwork. I love to draw, and the recruiter guy was like, it was all drawings of Disney and Warner Brothers stuff, which I was like obsessed with, Looney Tunes and Disney cartoons. And he was so snarky and he was like, haven't you ever had an original thought? And it was, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know if people realize like what power position he was in over me. And I was like so vulnerable and it was so crushing that I pretty much gave up on any kind of college at all. I eventually took like some like junior college classes for a later, but I just basically just started doing stand-up comedy. I was like, can I swear?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah. When he said that to me, I was like, okay, well, fuck this noise. This guy is the gatekeeper of all college for for all of the United States, and he has basically stabbed me in the heart. And so I'm going to go off and just do stand-up comedy. And then later, when I moved to Los Angeles, not really even to pursue animation, I moved here to go to like the center of stand-up comedy, Los Angeles. Then I started. That was like when YouTube was starting up and stuff, and I was drawing cartoons like comic strips for like the LA Weekly and other alternative press things. And then when animation became democratized, like anyone can do it, that was when what eventually became like the Adobe suite of programs. Like I loved cartoons, but my parents were like so blue collar, so middle class. Like I always hear like Brad Bird talk, and he's like, and then my parents were like, "Whoa, you really like cartoons?" And they got me a point and shoot downward camera, and I started making my own cartoons. My parents were supportive of me drawing on paper. They were supportive of me doing what was almost free. Like apparently the boy found a pencil in the park and he came across some paper and he's enjoying dragging the pencil across the paper, and he's not hurting anyone or costing me any money. So I'm going to let him keep doing it. But they weren't going out and buying me like camera, like film stands and everything. But once that software was released, Flash and Photoshop, then I was kind of like off to the races and started turning my comic strips into cartoons. At first, crudely, and then when I really, really endeavored to make my first like substantial cartoon, which was this cartoon called the Mustache Contest. That cartoon was my first like sizable cartoon. Like it was like 4 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. And that cartoon I submitted to actually submitted to festivals, and it got into pretty much every festival I submitted to. It got into this HBO Aspen Comedy Festival, which was really big at the time. Got into like the London International Film Festival, the Melbourne International, and got into Animation Block Party, which I became very closely aligned with in Brooklyn. And it got into Annecy, like the biggest animation festival in the world, Annecy. And it was the first short I made. And then I was like, huh. And then also I put that short up on the web, like on YouTube. And I think like in the first month, like 1 million people have seen it or had viewed it. And it was up on Newgrounds as well, which was a great site. And then I was like, I was like 1 million people. I don't think 1 million people will ever see me do stand-up comedy. Maybe this is fate telling me to go off in a different direction. Like I'm having some success here. Um, and so then I started pursuing animation in a big way. But back to your original question, in a way, college. Even when I moved to LA and it was like when that short hit big, I was like, maybe I should be in animation. And at that point, I applied to Cal Arts and was rejected by Cal Arts, and they said you could reapply in a year. But then I was like, I'm not. I've always just kind of like been very driven. I was like, I'm not going to sit around for a year twiddling my thumbs. And at that point, I did take some college, like junior college courses at Santa Monica College, which was had great teachers, but it was like very low rent. Like they had camera stands, but you always had to make sure you had your own light bulb in your backpack because people would steal the light bulbs out of the camera stands.
Wow.
So yeah, but still they had all of the equipment and stuff. I guess that's how you could tell who was taking animation courses, is who had a light bulb in their backpack. And you had to be very careful with your backpack because it was like you were carrying around a carton of eggs. It's like somebody knocks your backpack off the table. No, all my light bulbs.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But yeah, so I took like one semester of animation classes at Santa Monica College. And then I basically applied and I was just animating so much. Like I could not stop animating with that Flash and Photoshop. And by the time after one semester, I got a job at animating on a show for the Disney Channel. And so when a year came back around, I did not apply to Cal Arts. I was working alongside people who had gone to Cal Arts after one semester of school, and I didn't pay the exorbitant tuition to Cal Arts. And yeah, and then I was yeah, so I had zero student loans and they had all of these insane student loans. And so then yeah, during my early years, you asked me before we started recording if I can talk for an hour. As you could tell, you asked me one question and now I've talked for 15 minutes.
No, I'm here for it. Yeah, please.
But I during my 20s and 30s, I was like very proud of like, look at me, look at all I've accomplished without any college. In hindsight, it would have been, I did move up pretty quickly, but there was if you didn't go to Cal Arts, there was a real Cal Arts lockdown on Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. If you didn't go to Cal Arts, they were pretty heavily swayed towards, it was, and it wasn't a bad thing. It was like, obviously there was a lot of talented people coming out of Cal Arts and they want to hire their friends. Like if you went to Cal Arts, you're paying for education, but you're also paying for a social structure. Like it's like a little pretend job kind of is what college is. And those people all moved through and then once they had their jobs, of course, they were going to hire all their friends who they went to school with. And then later, that's how it was when I first started working. And then later, SVA took over Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, like Rebecca Sugar and Ian Jones Quarterly. Like, and then you kind of like, and Phil Renda, and then you kind of had to, there was kind of an idea in the air, like, you kind of had to go to SVA if you wanted a job at Cal Arts. And and in Nickelodeon, but now both of those studios are basically shuttered. So I win in the end.
Oh my gosh.
Take
Listen,
that,
that's yeah.
Cartoon Network. Look who's on top now.
I was gonna say honestly, like hearing this whole story, it's really inspiring that you basically like you took your own path and like basically screwed you to that guy that was like rude to you saying that comment. Like, oh my gosh, then using that fuel for you, and like
Yeah,
that's amazing.
and you know
Yeah.
what's funny about that is now as an adult, I look back on that moment, and that is not that San Francisco Art Academy is
Mm.
not a college where you have to be accepted. It's just a pay college. Like
Oh.
anyone who could pay the tuition can get in. That guy rebuffed me, and he wasn't even in a position to rebuff. Like
Huh.
that's not USC or Harvard. It's basically essentially a junior college where the credits don't count. Like
Huh.
anybody can
Interesting.
go to San Francisco Academy of Arts. So yeah, it's like I was there like, take my money. He's like, I don't like your drawings of Pinocchio. Get out of here. I don't want your free money.
What? Oh my God. Wow, that's so bizarre. But I mean, obviously, like you have to start somewhere and like you draw from things that you love growing up. And you mentioned Looney Tunes. So would you say like that was one of like your biggest influences early on?
Yeah, I think the my encyclopedic knowledge of like the timing of those gags mixed with I had like a lot of animators have that, but what I had that was a real leg up on everybody was that I had done stand-up comedy for like a
Mm.
decade. And so they always tell you like you should take an acting class or you should take an improv class or or a lesser or a different version of that is like you really need to study the work of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin so you understand pathos, a word that I don't even know if I still understand the meaning of it.
Mm.
But I get what it is. But it's such a overly snooty way to be like to say like, oh, the character, it's like basically pathos is like punching. You don't want to do like punching, the character needs to be like down on his luck.
Mm.
You could just say like in comedy, it's really good if the character's down on his luck. But
Mhm.
instead they say, you need to give him pathos. It's like, what? Oh, pathos. Yes, of course, pathos. Um, but yeah, I did being that I did all those years of stand-up comedy, it did give me a leg up on my coworkers in animation because I actually knew how to act
Mm.
and how to sell jokes and everything and like understood pacing, how to pace the
Mm.
jokes and also like the real value of those quiet beats. Like everybody always wants to jam everything together with like no downtime, but you could say more with a furtive glance or with a or somebody kind of like yeah just giving somebody a little like what are you talking about look than you can say with dialogue. Yeah, my favorite storyboarding note to give, and I'm always like to the storyboarders like, dude, other directors say this is like I'm always like, and then the character should brighten. And that's just kind of when the character goes from having a default look to looking excited, they brighten.
You know, you're right, because it's true that like sometimes the most compelling moments in storytelling in general are just like those quiet moments. You let the moment breathe, and you're right, like without dialogue, yeah, those tend to be like kind of like the most, in my opinion, emotional as well, that are like really interesting. Yeah. And obviously then it's no wonder you directed the fish out of water episode of BoJack, which we'll get into, like because of the no dialogue in that episode. Yeah. Well, very
Yeah.
little dialogue, I should say, a few
Well,
minutes of dialogue, but
we really were kind of inspired by like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin on that one. But yeah, a lot of times on BoJack, I would say a note I would give often is like, yeah, in this moment, I would write like, give them those Pixar eyes, but that they do on Pixar a lot, where they just sit on somebody and then they do there's like very little going on in the animation, but they just do those little micro eye movements. And it's so effective to be like, oh, this character's really thinking,
Mhm.
where their eyes are just have like little tiny small Pixar eye darts where the eye
Mhm.
is just kind of bouncing around in the eye socket a little bit, and you're like, whoa, that character is really internalizing, or that character is really taking this moment in, and it's like such a simple little cheat. Deep, 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 deep.
It's true. Pixar does that really well. Disney, obviously, too, like with the original, like, the 2D animation, like all those classics. Yeah. But so before we get into BoJack, though, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your web shows. As I told you before, I just binged all of Low Tide. I was watching some of Nature Break, hilarious. So how did like those ideas come about for you?
Yeah, that was uh, it was just a really great time in a way to get into animation. Obviously, the best time to get into animation would probably be like the 30s or 40s. But I just, because I was doing stand up, both of those things came from, there was this network, Fuel TV, and there was these guys who basically wanted to create a, not like, it was just like a sketch show called Stupid Face, and a lot of great folks came out of it. Will and Dave, who created Mr. Pickles, that was their first TV thing. Mr. Pickle, right? The demon dog on Adult Swim.
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Pickle. Mike Mayfield, who went on to be like the supervising director of Big Mouth
Hmm.
and Midnight Gospel and Mr. Pickle. Andre Hyland, who's so funny, uh, incredibly funny comedian, and all these other comedians, Ryan Flynn, all worked on this great show. And we could kind of just do whatever we want, and it was on TV. The budgets were low, but they kind of just let us do whatever we want, and I could live off of it. And I made all these shorts, and then they would put them on TV, and then I would take those shorts and also submit them to festivals, which was, it's like that thing, like, don't ask permission, and then if you mess up, then say you're sorry. Like I
Right.
just would just submit them all to festivals, and then I had a nice little festival career, which is kind of how I earned my, I didn't go to college. Sometimes I also think like doing festivals was kind of my college, because I went and it had that social structure. I would go to the festival and I'd meet so many animators. So I take all of these shorts, these Low Tide shorts and these Nature Break shorts, and submit them to festivals, and they would program them. And then I'd go to the festival, and it was a Nature Break or Low Tide cartoon, which I went to Animation Block Party and met Caroline Foley, who was there in support of her Cal Arts student film that was having a festival run, calling No Naked. It's so funny. She's so funny as well. And then when I got back to LA, where she also lived, she's like, "Hey, I work at this place, Shadow Machine, and they're looking for an animator who really knows comedy." And I gave them your name, and that ended up being for BoJack. And yeah, it was such a interesting thing, because I met then that Alex and Corey, who run Shadow Machine, and then they, it was like that kind of, it's not, it might sound like I'm saying that this was a negative thing, but it wasn't. It's just how show business run. Like they met me, they saw that they saw that I wasn't crazy, and then they brought me in to Tornante, which owns BoJack, and it's like this Michael Eisner's super sleek Beverly Hills office, and I'm sitting there next to Alex Bulkley, and he's like, "Yeah, we just want to tell you, Mike is the guy. We've worked with Mike for a long time, and we trust Mike, and we think he's the guy who can make this pilot." And I had only met Alex like one time. But yeah, they're like, "Yeah, Mike is the guy. Like, we know he can super duper handle it." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I can handle it." But I had only met Alex once.
Well, it's like fake it till you make it, as they always say. So there you go. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
And I'm faking it till I make it. And I'm just a kid. But Alex and Corey, who own the company, were also faking it. So like
Hmm.
everyone all up and down the food chain is faking it until they make it.
Right. And then you were the very first animator that Netflix hired.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, that is something you can create your own story. I mean, technically I wasn't working for BoJack was like the fourth show. And I was the first, and I was hired as an animator to create that show. So I wasn't hired by Netflix, but you kind of like it's good to be kind of like a carry a little bit of PT Barnum and just kind of like create your own headlines.
Right. No, but that's good though. And then, so then how did you meet, like, what was it like then meeting Raphael Bob Waxberg for the first time, creator of BoJack Horseman?
Yeah, that was very memorable meeting him and then in the next meeting, Lisa, who at that time was living in San Francisco, I believe. Or no, she was living in New York City and she moved to LA for her and her partner, Adam Conover, moved to LA for her to work on BoJack. But I think for the pilot, she was still in New York. It was only when the show got picked up she moved to LA. But yeah, Raphael was amazing. I always forget how young he was. He's kind of a bit of a wunderkind. I think certainly the executive producers, Noel and Steve, Noel Bright and Steve Cohen, that's kind of what they were putting forward is you could, in hindsight, they were like, oh, nobody knows about this kid and he's pretty brilliant. Um, Yeah, Raphael is very eccentric. He is in a way very much like that frog Charlie who he voiced.
Oh yeah, Charlie Witherspoon. Yes.
Yeah, Charlie Witherspoon. He did the voice of it. He was very gangly and kind of very goofy, but then obviously very kind of introspective and, you know, really helmed all these terrific seasons and oversaw like he was technically, I think the first season Noel was show running just because Raphael was so young, but Raphael was actually really show running. Like at first for the pilot, we when we did all the voice records, they had me record them because Raphael was like, I don't know how to record a voice record. And they're like, Mike, you can do this, right? You can help him and show him the way. And I was like, yes, of course. But I had never done it either. Because I was also pretty young, and they're like, um you have directed voice records before, yes. And I was like, yeah, I have, but they were for those those like low type cartoons, and like so I voice recorded all my goofy friends, but there was some fun actors in there, like if you watch those low type cartoons, Paul Rust, who later on went on to create that Love show for Netflix.
Oh,
He's
cool.
one of the voices. He's just a terrific voice. Um, so yeah, and I remember I was in on those voice records for Will Arnett and Patton Oswalt and Aaron Paul, who was on ISN line. But like Will Arnett and Patton Oswalt were in there over at Margarita Mix, which is a place where a lot of people do voice records. And I just faked it till I made it. Like I just went in there and charged forward and directed it. And I remember behind me, it was me and Raphael, but I was doing the directing, sitting in this middle bar area where you actually talk into the microphone and you can talk into the booth. And then behind me was Noel and Steve, these very imposing dudes who are the EPs of BoJack. And then Michael Eisner was sitting there behind me. So he's like, Michael Eisner, who used to run Disney, like he's been in show business, since it was like two cavemen like putting on a little show in front of a fire or whatever. He's been in show business forever. Um, and it was pretty stressful. Thankfully, they were behind me and I couldn't see them. But Noel, who was the EP, he kept like Will Arnett would be in the booth, and then Noel would go, Mike. And then I would turn around, and he would basically start doing baseball signs to me. He wouldn't talk. He'd be like, he'd hugging his ear. He'd be kind of like patting his shoulder, and then being like down, down, down. And I would just go, I would just nod like, uh-huh, I get it. But I don't know what the hell he was talking about. He was like, I was like, what are you telling me? Throw him a curveball? I don't know what the heck is going on. And then I would turn around and just go like, can you do it one more time but faster? And then he would do it, and then I'd turn around and look at Noel and be like, yeah.
Wow.
And I'd be like, this is insane.
That's funny.
Like, does show business have like everybody knows these showbiz hand signs like in baseball pitching or something? Because I didn't know what the heck he was up to. Like, and he did it through the whole record. He was giving me hand signs, and I was just like, I'm not going to stop and go like, no, because I also want to, for Noel, maybe he was just fucking with me. Like, I don't want him to know that I don't know what he's talking about. But he was giving me these hand signs, and I was just like, oh, of course. Tug on your left earlobe. I'm going to take care of that. Means to, have him read it in a Spanish accent. Like, got it.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. That's too funny. So would you say like you guys kind of hit the ground running, so to speak, once you went into production, or was it, I'm sure, like a learn as you go type process?
Yeah, we did hit the ground running for sure. It was like the fifth or sixth Netflix show. At first, the show was picked up by the WB, and it would have been a completely different show. It would have been like airing with like Top Model.
Right. Oh wow,
Like,
I never knew that.
it would have been like BoJack Smizing, like Tyra Banks. But then it was picked up, and then we were starting to talk about like how do we make it for the WB. And then I have never heard of this, and the executives, our execs, were also very confused when the CEO heard about the executive of the WB greenlighting the show. He said, "No, we're not greenlighting this. Cancel the green light." And after, so we had been picked up by them for a few weeks or a month. And then the CEO of the network was like, "No, I don't want to make this stupid show." And he canceled the green light. And then at that point, we were like, we may have dodged a bullet here, but what do we do now? And at that point, Raphael pitched it to Netflix, Blair and Andy, like the original two OG execs over there, who are still there. It used to just be Blair and Andy, and now there's thousands of execs.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it would just be Ted Sarandos, and underneath them, Blair and Andy. And so he pitched it to them, and I believe they were on the fence. And then Aaron Paul called Ted Sarandos, and it was the last season of Breaking Bad. So Aaron Paul was red hot, and he called Ted Sarandos and he said, "Pick up this show, bitch," to paraphrasing catchphrase from a decade or more ago. And then basically Aaron Paul got it picked up just from Aaron Paul kind of like making that call to Ted Sarandos and just laying on that pressure. And then, but they said for that first season, they said, all right, you have a pickup if you can make the whole season in 6 months. It has to be done in 6 months. And just for reference, like it takes a full year to make a season of The Simpsons or Futurama or whatever. Or in the case of Rick and Morty, it takes a decade to make one season. So they had to pull together a writing staff Thankfully, I think Raphael had already pretty much broke the season as a part of the pitch, but they had to pull together a full writing staff, and we had to pull together a bunch of directors and be background department, character department, all in to get the show done in 6 months. That was the condition. And that was like signing a. I remember when the first day we started, the production manager, who had been my friend previous to that, he said he had a bit of like Asperger's, and he came up to me in a very plain way, said, "Well, Mike, um, I just want to say it's been a pleasure being your friend. I don't think our friendship will survive this process, but I think in the end we'll have a good show that will result of it." And I was like, "What are you talking about? You're weird." But he was 100% correct. Our
Wow.
friendship did not survive the process.
Oh wow. That's crazy though.
Yeah, it was like signing on to that 6 month thing was like signing a deal with the devil. We also know that even though the way show business works, even though the network knew it was ridiculous, once you can do something and do it for a price, then every year they're going to be like, well, do it for that price again.
Hmm.
Yeah, but that was crazy. Was it crazy because you got it done? And
Huh.
you're like, yes, it was crazy. So we were always, I think, we didn't season 2, we didn't do in 6 months, but they didn't, it's not like they gave us a full year. They gave us maybe 7 months.
Oh wow, okay. Like one extra month. Oh, interesting. So I know that you were a supervising director throughout the show's run. So I'd love to hear kind of like day to day of what that entails, because I understand it's basically like you oversee the directors of the show.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very like as I was on it, I was also gaining in the producer credits.
Hmm.
In the first season, I was supervising director, maybe in the second season too, but then in the third season, I was co-producer, and then in the fourth, producer, and then or something like, and then by the end, I was co-EP,
Oh, nice.
and that did reflect to what the changes in my job were. Because like yes, in the beginning, I was basically just overseeing the boarding and the design departments, and also helping fix story when it needed fixed, and adding. I don't know if you know about the how the show got made, but I would add a lot of jokes. Like me personally, I would add jokes, and then by the end, like I would be the one who added all the animal jokes. Raphael did not really. He's a very smart guy. He didn't really know much about animals. And Lisa only knows about horses. She only knows and cares about horses. But I just happened, it was like the right person at the right place, because I really love animals and am very interested in animals. And so I was able to put all of these very specific animal jokes in. And then by the end, that pattern had been, I had set up, that in the scenes there would be sprinkled in like animal sight gags, and then between all the scenes there would be animal sight gags. And then by season 5 and 6, the whole storyboard team was, and 4, 5, 6, the directors, it started with the directors would also do them too, and then all the storyboarders and everything would be pitching animal gags and everything, and I'd be like, wait a second, that's my fun little job. That's what I like to do. But they had all were doing them and doing them better by the final season. And I was like, meh, I'm gonna take my ball and go home. But yeah, so in the beginning, season 1 and season 2, I would just be overseeing those departments. And then, I was also involved in staffing of those departments. But by season 6, and this is what should happen if you reach a season 6 of any show, like there was a lot of retention at that point of employees, directors, background designers, character designers. So all of those departments were humming along pretty smoothly on their own, especially the directors. We had a lot of retention in the directors, so they basically really knew like what and I was, of course, serving Raphael's vision, what Raphael wanted to see. That didn't mean that we still didn't take big swings. Like the show was initially supposed to be like, because Lisa came from indie comics. I kind of did too when I was doing those alternative cartoons for LA Weekly and stuff. So the show was supposed to look like it was like a zine or an indie comic. That idea did not survive. I don't even know if it survived season 1. I don't know if we could be that precise and that, delicate when we had to make a show in 6 months. We just made the show we could make in 6 months. But that was the idea. But yeah, so by the end of season 6, I was involved a lot in staffing and talking about, we'd get pulled in when they were talking about making a BoJack T-shirt or Funko Pops, and I would always make the posters. So I was doing a lot of stuff that was involved in the promotion and bigger production and stuff. I was getting called in a lot of managerial stuff, which wasn't always exciting.
So then would you say production wise, like as the show progressed each season, that it got easier, or was it like more challenging with each year?
No, it would get easier. If it wasn't
nice.
getting easier, then I would be a neglectful leader. Like it had to get easier because you continue, like, as you could cipher off people who weren't working out or who weren't good matches for the show or just personality wise. So towards the end, we had like an all-star, like Adam Parton, Amy Winfrey, these directors, Aaron Long, James Bowman, Peter Merriman, Molly Helms, who kind of went on to Tuca and Birdie. Just these, I know I'm probably omitting somebody, but these were like people who were so ding-dang talented. So they were just turning in such good work.
Nice.
We were pretty well set up.
I love that you contributed a lot to like the animal gags and puns of the show, because that's like such a big reason why I love the show. In addition to obviously like the fact that it's tackles such really heavy issues and all the nuances of it, all the emotions. So yeah, like having those two that balance it out is what's so great too.
Yeah, we had a fun thing. Like in season 1, I think Diane's dad dies.
Oh,
And
right.
yeah, I remember there's a mortician who is a maggot. And so the scene needed a button, like just a little joke at the end to go out on. It just ended, the transition wasn't working. And so we were in the editorial room pitching on a joke, and I was just thinking out loud, and I was like, well, maggots turn into flies. Is there anything there? And it wasn't funny. I was just kind of pitching around, thinking out loud. And Raphael was like, what do you mean maggot turns into a fly? I was like, that's what a maggot is. Like a maggot's like a pupa form of a fly. He goes, one animal doesn't turn into another animal. And I was like, being delicate, I was like, no, like I said, a maggot is a pupa form of a fly. There's an egg and then a little pupa. And this is for most insects. And then they turn into their adult form, a fly. Like there's an egg and then a grub and then a beetle. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, oh, sure. And so that was Raphael's knowledge of the animal kingdom. He didn't know that a maggot turned into a fly. And then I remember, and so later on, there was an episode where I think that Adam Parton directed, where BoJack is having this big party because he's nominated for an Oscar. And then he's having this big blown out party with all these hanger-ons and weirdos and drugs. And I had a joke where I had an eye, which is this from it's from Madagascar. It's it's a lemur, but it's like a
Oh,
nocturnal lemur.
yeah, I know you're
It
talking about,
has
right?
it has a really long index finger that it uses to tap on tree bark to hear if there's a beetle underneath it, and then if there is, it uses this really long finger to dig it out and then eat it off the finger. This little grubs or beetles. And so I had one at the party with his really long index finger snorting a big long line of coke off of his finger. Uh, so that is a deep dive animal joke.
Oh my
You know,
goodness.
like an like because in the early season, like all the storyboarders would just be pitching the same giraffes are tall jokes again. I'm like, I can't have any. There was a thing that Raphael knew too, where I'd be like, no more giraffe jokes. I have a embargo on giraffe jokes. I've seen enough giraffe are tall jokes. It's not funny anymore. We got to top these giraffes are tall jokes. But when I did that I joke, the one of the executive producers, Noel, he kind of turned around and looked at me. He's like, "So what are we putting aliens in the show now?" And I was like, "Oh no, that is an I. It is a nocturnal lemur from the island country of Madagascar."
Hmm.
And he's like, "Whatever, dork."
Let's see that, but people learned a lot then about, yeah, that's too funny. Oh my goodness. So I'd love to get into Fish Out of Water, the episode you directed. So how'd that come about for you? Like, did you ask to direct that episode? Did Raphael ask you to direct it? Like, how'd that come about?
Well, it all started, I think, in season one. There was an episode where it was the this cop or security guard mistakenly thinks that BoJack is robbing a bank, and so he comes up and he tasers BoJack, and the cop is an electric eel, so it's
Oh,
electric eel electrocuting BoJack, and that joke actually was from a boarder. I say it might have been Peter Keehee, who was very funny, and so we looked. So I was like, I looked at that and I was like, this is very funny, but this is a fish who's on land. I was like, this isn't how the world works. Fish are not on the land because essentially BoJack is just like a reflection of our world, except animals are people. So uh, I, but I was like, it's too funny to cut. I'm gonna let Raphael make the call. So I I put it up in editorial and they all laughed at it and they're like, that's great. And I was like, okay, but look at what this is saying about the world. Because when you're kind of, it's kind of fun when you're making these shows, especially in the early season, like you're creating a world and the rules of the world. I would always jokingly call Raphael God. I was like, well, you're the God of this world. So whatever wrath you want to rain down on these characters, it's up to you. Um, but I was saying, I said, you are the ruler of this world. You're saying that fish, if we leave this joke in, you're saying that fish can walk around on the walk around above the water. And then he's like, we started talking about it. He's like, well, maybe they could have a system. And we did it later with this Gary Marshall character, who was this fish director who got hired to direct Secretariat after Kelsey. I can't believe I'm remembering this, after Kelsey
Kelsey
Jennings
Jennings. Yeah, yeah.
got fired. And he had a thing where he was like spraying his gills with water. He always had like a thing of water with him that he was sipping off of. That was
Right.
Raphael's explanation of how fish could be above water. Is they were constantly spraying themselves with water or something.
Hmm.
I don't know if the science quite works, but so the joke survived. But then I was always saying, now that you show that there's fish people, you know, I wonder what's going on under the ocean. There must be cities under the ocean. And he'd be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, yeah, at the end of, or at the beginning of season two, he's like, he came to me, he's like, we're starting writing. Is there anything you'd like to see? And I said, what about that world? What about those cities under the water? And he'd be like, oh, yeah, cities under the water. And then nothing came of it. And then in season three, when they were starting, anything you'd like to see? I was like, you know me, I want to see that city under the water. He's like, oh yeah, yeah, the city under the water. But then he had an idea that he wanted to have a whole silent episode. And then he had the idea like, oh, I can combine these two things. Like BoJack would have to be silent underwater because he's wearing this scuba suit. So it would be and he can't hear or understand. I mean, we could kind of hear them in a muddled way, which was really fun. We had a whole loop group, like a classic Hollywood loop group, come in and do all the fish sounds to the picture. Of course, in animation, generally, we get the voices first and then animate to the voices. But in this case, I think we did all the storyboard and then we had a loop group come in and do just all the like, do all these little chirping noises to the fish people. It was really fun. And the loop group was so fun. There was like a woman who did children's voices. Like it was like they were piano keys, human piano keys, because each one represented a different type of voice, all the way to like this guy who was like this big guy who really had a very deep baritone voice. And like he was there as a part of the piano keys of people. But yeah, so eventually, so Raphael ended up marrying these two. He was very into doing these kind of special episodes, like he later did with the eulogy, where it's just all one long speech. This Fish Out of Water was in the same vein, where he wanted to do kind of unique, big swing episodes. Also, that one where we're inside of his mother's failing brain because she has Alzheimer's. They're not really bottle episodes technically, but I don't know, they might be something like that. Yeah, so he came to me, he said, all right, we're doing it. And because it was going to be silent, they knew it was going to be very pantomime-y. And they knew that I really knew a lot about the Looney Tunes and had a kind of all the directors were fantastic, but I was maybe more of a student of classic Hollywood, which I really love, and all those Looney Tunes stuff. And so they had me direct it. So I was supervising myself directing. And then I brought in an amazing group. It would be impossible to fail because my three main boarders were Aaron Long, who's amazing, and everybody should check out his shorts. James Bowman, who's a miracle, and Otto Murga, who's also just a very terrific storyboarder. And we basically we had 3 pages for a script, on a regular BoJack episode, especially towards the end. It would be like a 22-minute episode, but we have like a 40-page script that would turn out to be a like 26-minute thumbnail pass that would have to have 4 minutes cut from it between thumbnails, or just a final picture. It would end up having to get like 4 minutes cut. So yeah, we only had like 3 pages and very scant dialogue. And we ended up even cutting. There was like a whole sequence where BoJack was trying to figure out how to eat food, like where he went to like the hotel continental breakfast or whatever. And then I was looking at it with the line producer, and even the line producer, Eric Blyler, immediately recognized, he's like, the whole point of this episode is the baby. There's like the trick of him not talking or anything, but storytelling wise, it's the baby and his journey with that baby, trying to help that baby. So anything that came before, it's like, just get to the baby. It's just like when you're watching Star Wars, it's like, we just need to, when they added all that extra stuff to Star Wars, it's like, I want to get, what I want is Han Solo, Chewbacca, Luke, and Obi-Wan Kenobi in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. That's when Star Wars, you're really cooking. And it's the same thing when they added all that stuff to Star Wars. You're like, what are you doing? You're bogging down this first act. You need to get to this end of this first act where you get all of these people in this cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. That's when the story is really, it's all very interesting, but then you're really cooking when you get those 4 guys in that cockpit. And, in that Fish Out of Water, it's like, we need to get to this baby as soon as possible. We just need to cut everything we can away from the time before we get to this baby. And that afforded us nice scenes that could breathe, like when he gets off the bus and that baby's on his back and he's just having all of this kind of pantomime fun with this baby, and that fun thing where that baby eats that cigarette.
Yeah.
BoJack gives the baby a cigarette. And
There's
BoJack,
also the taffy factory then when it blows up and like the baby, it's so cute, that little seahorse.
yeah, that whole thing where the baby is on BoJack when they get off the bus, that was Aaron Long, and it's all
Oh,
so
nice.
great, Aaron Long. And then that whole factory was James Bowman, who's really great with all of figuring stuff out, like that factory. And that factory was definitely like when we were talking about it with Raphael, it was supposed to be like that Charlie Chaplin when he's in the gears of that factory. And then and then I always put stuff in. I mean, I'm a little bit of a cad and a bounder. Like I put that thing in where the baby, like sugar gets released into the water, and then the baby's hopping around like exactly like Daffy Duck in Porky's Duck Hunt. And it was like a direct lift from that Tex Avery cartoon. But Raphael and the EPs, they didn't get that. Just like, oh, the baby takes sugar or ingests some sugar and starts bouncing around, but the baby is going like, woo, just like Daffy Duck.
Gotta love those classic. Yeah. You know, I didn't realize that myself either. I didn't make that connection. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch that because that's so wonderful. But then also, honestly, like the emotional journey in that episode, the fact that he bonds with this little baby seahorse, he returns him home, he wants nothing in return. And then he has that emotional growth where he writes to Kelsey Jennings saying, Kelsey, in this horrifying world, all we have are the connections we make. So that's really beautiful and poignant too. I love all that.
Yeah, and you get that a lot in your real life where you're like, it's, it's very clear in that one because the words get washed away.
Yeah.
But you get that a lot in your real life too. You could really see how people would connect with that because a lot of times you're like, wow, I've really figured something out and I'm going to share my message with the people I care about. And then you share your message and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's offensive, or why are you making this all about yourself? Or, it's just your message they don't connect with you in the way that you're like, this is a very clear message to me. Like, I've really had a real awakening here. And they're like, your awakenings aren't lining up.
That's true too, though. But then also, like, it's just fantastic at the very end when he realizes all along he could have spoken. When he presses the button, he's like, "Oh, son of a!" Like, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
That's a fun kind of classic button and done in a big way like that. I like when that happens. That was in the script, but
Mm.
there's a real history of fun payoffs like that where right at the end they realize, oh, I could have done this the whole time. I think that like Laurel and Hardy has also have kind of a lot of stuff like that.
Well, it's similar to honestly the episode you brought up, Free Churro, the eulogy episode, because he has that whole entire speech, and at the very end, oh, it's just like it was the wrong funeral parlor.
Yes,
So
same.
good. Or
That,
the
see,
wrong
I mean,
room.
those
Wrong
are
room.
two. That's basically the same joke. I mean, when you boil down comedy, which I just like, I love to think of the functions and kind of the mechanics of comedy. Those two are the exact same joke. It's just that kind of like wah 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 payoff. I just love, yeah. And I always love thinking about be like sitting with my son and watching like a Roadrunner cartoon and being like, this is just a list joke. They set up a premise and then they rattle off four jokes based on that premise and they put the best joke last.
Yeah.
That's how this is what a list joke is.
Like breaking down the comedy. Oh, does he like that? Your son was like, whatever, dad. Like,
Yeah, he does. I think
yeah, nice.
yeah, maybe not. I don't know.
He'll appreciate it, I'm
I don't
sure.
know. He's been locked in his room for a couple days. Maybe this might be why.
My goodness. No, but honestly, that's what I love with BoJack Horseman because again, tying back to like in a sense like this emotional catharsis, but then in a way like oh, it's all for nothing. Like it's just so like plays into the comedy of it as well. I love all that. It's just so funny. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, so I guess I mean like that's the beauty of the storytelling in that episode with all the visuals, and you still hit all those emotional beats so well without the because it's not needed the dialogue. You still see like he has this connection with this baby seahorse. You still see like the emotional reward with again with Kelsey Jen. Wait, does he? I forget now. Does he actually send her the letter, or I think it floats
She's
away?
there. She's at the film festival in support of a
Right,
movie
but
she made.
I think she doesn't actually get the letter in the end, right?
So she gets it. She holds it and she looks at it
Oh,
and it's all washed away. And she's
that's
like,
right. Okay, yeah, I've forgotten. Okay, so similar thing exactly. Yeah, like just
yeah,
like oh, like whatever. But then we see at least we see the growth with BoJack, even though again, like as you alluded to, like well, the messages don't align with other people, but for him at least, he had that growth.
yeah. I mean, he had screwed over Kelsey Jennings so much. It's like, oh, great, you had an epiphany. Well, I'm glad you had an epiphany. I'm still unemployed.
Yeah.
I'm glad you came around.
That's why at least she has like by the end, like then she has that new film that she's working on. So that's great too, like her overall.
Yeah. I can't pay my rent with epiphanies.
Yes. Oh my God. Oh, that's right. When she was doing like those commercials that they called them this whole like whatever they called it, this whole fancy thing for just ads, really. Like oh, this
Yeah. She
emotional,
made
like
a movie. I think she had an indie movie that was there.
right.
Yeah.
It's been a while now for me, but yeah. But I do actually also have, because I know you've given interviews in that book as well. The Art of BoJack Horseman book. Highly recommend to fans. That's a great book with interviews from all of you guys who worked on the series. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. It's a fun
Nice.
process too.
So like overall, what would you say is like your personal, like proudest contribution to BoJack Horseman, whether it's silly or anything? Or that
Um,
episode, anything.
I mean, I really loved all of the animal jokes
Mm-hmm.
and I always remember I think in season two, at the after season two came out, uh Raphael told me he's like out of the whole season, the joke that everybody compliments me on is this Stella joke that I wrote and I put in there where this Marlon they're in like a 50s diner and there's this Marlon Brando because there's like a Marilyn Monroe and Marlon Brando like
Right.
waiters
Right.
and he's coming around and he has three beers and he goes Stella, Stella, Corona Light. He's like everybody compliments that joke and I'm like yeah I didn't write that joke that was our supervising director.
That's so good. Yeah.
But that's I mean all of those things would be what I really kind of I'm proud of those, but I think the greatest thing that came out of the show was actually uh, the people who I got to work with, Raphael and Lisa, of course, and then we all went on to work on Tuca and Birdie, which I enjoyed so much as well. I was a supervisor of the first season of that, but yeah, all those directors and department heads and stuff. We had so much fun working on the show, and to Raphael's credit, he allowed it to be a really fun environment. The editors too, we had a lot of fun with the editors, Jose and Molly and Claire and Brian Swanson. Um, that was really the most fun, and just watching all those people do such great work and collaborating with them to do such great work. That was very rewarding. Like when you because I do love the proper execution of a joke and also the storytelling and like the proper execution of all the storytelling and everything and like pulling that off with coworkers is is a lot of fun. And I always remember very fondly like it used to be so much more difficult to be an animator or a storyboarder, but we all have little mini movie studios here in our pockets, these
Mhm.
iPhones. And whenever boarders would be having trouble drawing something or how to stage something, I would always grab Aaron Long, who I knew um, was safe to do this with, but just grab him and like be like, well, what he's got to do is he's got to wrestle him to the ground, and I'd wrestle Aaron Long to the ground, and then Aaron Long would turn over on me and everything, and be like, all right, did you get that? Did you get a good angle on that? Yeah, that kind of stuff was fun. It was a pretty good group. I think you could see we were having fun. It's of course a show about five different people dealing with five different types of depression, but we handled it in a very fun way. I should also say my son right now really loves axolotls, and Ann Walker, who's another great director. She really wanted to put axolotls in the show and talked Raphael into making Todd's girlfriend an axolotl.
Right, right.
And that was another animal that they had never even heard of. But she was ahead on the axolotls are. My son is almost 7, and axolotls are so popular right now. I
Oh.
wonder if that's all over the nation. I know they're hugely popular in Mexico,
Hmm.
historically and currently, and maybe it's because of the Latin American, the amount of people from Mexico here in Los Angeles that they're very popular. But my son loves axolotls, and I was telling him about this really great joke when they were having that big fight in that episode where Todd met his girlfriend, or yeah, his girlfriend's parents, and
Right.
her and her sister were fighting,
Yeah.
and and her sister pinned her down. They were both axolotls. They were kind of like twins,
Hmm.
and her girlfriend, or her sister, pinned her down and then ripped her arms off, and then swung them around in her hand and started beating her with her own hands. And then all of a sudden, the sister who was pinned on the ground went, and she regenerated 2 arms, and they sprung right out and grabbed the neck of her sister, like strangling her sister. And that was something I worked so hard on. I was like, this needs to happen. Like, it wasn't in the script. I was like, this would be the coolest thing ever if these axolotls were having a fight and regenerating arms and grabbing each other's throats and everything. And I mean, I don't want to. Raphael's very smart, obviously, but I mean, people are smart about different things. I wouldn't even say I'm smart in any way, but that was another thing, like where Raphael and the EP, they're like, what's going on here? Like, why are they growing new arms? And I was like, well, an axolotl can regenerate arms.
Oh my God. That episode, yeah, that episode's so funny with all the animation hijinks in that one. Like even the whole thing with like the lube that's spilling out and like all the sex gags in that. So funny because obviously with Todd and his girlfriend, like them being asexual and oh gosh, yeah, that's a really
Yeah,
great one.
it was so funny because Raphael would write these things, these
Mm.
sexual things, but I don't know if that's something he'd want out there, but I don't think it's a bad thing that he was so prudish. So he would write things with all this lube and all this sexual stuff.
Mm.
And then he would, anytime there was any sexual thing on screen, he'd be like, I don't know. It's just weird. It's just gross. I was like, we're just storyboarding what you put in your script. There was this one episode where each character was having sex or something. I remember it ended with Princess Carolyn having sex in the car, and she kind of like sinks down into the car off screen because you're shooting through the car. Then you just see her hand hit the window and leave a mark because it's so steamy. And he's like, this is disgusting. Like, what shit? They're just having sex. Everybody has sex. You know, your parents had sex, and that's why you're here.
There you go. Oh gosh. But I love what you mentioned too, because as you mentioned, a lot of you guys then went on to work on Tuca and Birdie, and sadly that show is canceled now. But I know because with that show, obviously it was like looser with like the rules of the world, so to speak. You had like a far more animation gags, that kind of stuff. It was a lot of fun,
I
that
would say
show.
I wouldn't that I think that's maybe a false equivalency.
Oh, sure.
We weren't looser. I guess comparatively it was looser, but there was rules in that world too.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Like we
Well,
wouldn't
I guess what I meant to say was like in terms of like being more like freer and looser with animation gags. Like there's just more like cartoony style in that as
yeah.
opposed to with both, But yeah, I see what you mean. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that one, that first season, and I don't know how much they kept using them, but
Mm.
I just loved it so much because I would sit in editorial with the directors in their episodes. and I go, okay. Our editor, Molly Yar, who's a terrific editor, she would get annoyed because I'd be like, Molly, okay, stop here. And I'd be like, okay, hit record. And I just have a microphone in my hand, like back in my stand-up comedy days. And I go, I said, okay, the third one. And you put that fart noise underneath that when they fall down in the mud there. And I would just sit there with the microphone, go, or and just so many little squeaks and squawks into the show, which I just had so much fun doing.
Oh gosh, I love all that. And because obviously with that shot being canceled, this brings me to it's a broad question for you, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on like where you feel like the industry is heading, like the just in general, like the animation industry, how it's changed, where you see it's heading, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a tough time right now because Netflix canceled so many shows, and HBO Max not only canceled so many shows, they also shuttered Cartoon Network Studios.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, animation, it's interesting. Little kid animation is always going to be around, obviously. Disney's seems to be doing pretty good. Um, but they're always going to be making animation for like preschool and kids. But I think they they kind of when BoJack, obviously, we're all riding on the coattails of The Simpsons and Futurama and King of the Hill and those shows. But they were their own thing. They were on Fox and they were their own very successful thing. BoJack and Rick and Morty were different, like the topics that were being covered. There maybe more can be grandfathered in under South Park as far as the scope of the topics. Like Simpsons always ends pretty happily, even though it kind of touches on a lot of stuff, but they just blow it out on South Park.
Yeah.
So because of the success of South Park, that's its own huge thing. But BoJack and Rick and Morty, again, I think BoJack is pretty well critically regarded, but Rick and Morty is a behemoth in the vein of Simpsons and South Park. Obviously, those ones are so just have such a head start on it, but it would be in those categories. But because of all that success, there was just became a glut of adult shows, and there was standouts like Big Mouth, but there was a lot that were just kind of like, oh, this celebrity is available to make this show. Let's just poot it out. And I think there was a watering down of the genre. So what does that mean? I think it possibly devalued it to audience members because there was a lot of just cheap copycat kind of shows. Obviously, they all were trying to make the best show possible. I don't want to like pay too or be too disrespectful to the creators of these unnamed shows. But there was just a glut. So this is a bad 1-2 punch. The canceling. So who was making these adult shows? HBO Max, HBO, Warner Brothers, and Netflix were having success with these things, and they're just canceling so much shows. They just released Velma. That seems to be culturally having a pretty good saturation point. So all is not lost, but it's led to a rockier job market for folks like myself who were riding high at the end of 2019, but now it's a little bit more slim pickings. And I think like negotiating wise, I was in the power position. By that I mean my manager. But now I'm not in the power position because there's not a lot of shows. So we'll see what happens. I certainly was, when things were getting, uh, skim, when there wasn't a lot of stuff, I was certainly talking to my manager, like, is there anything going on at Disney? Can I hop on any preschool show? Is there anything I can hop on over there? So, yeah. But I mean, Rick and Morty's going to keep going. South Park will go forever.
Yeah.
So there's still going to be adult shows. But would there be an appetite for one as critically beloved, but not, numbers wise loved as BoJack? I'm not sure. Like maybe perhaps that window has closed. I know certainly they're not looking for that over at Netflix right now. I mean, any celebrity could maybe bring in anything and they'd give it a try, but they definitely have changed course. Like when Mike Moon came in over there, he made or Mike Moon and the other executives, they were like taking big swings, like letting Jorge Gutierrez, who's a genius, just do what he wanted to, and that was the smartest thing they could ever do.
Mm.
But they were also letting like Penn Ward do whatever he wanted to, and he made Midnight Gospel, which is a very unconventional show, and though very beloved by the people who watched it, I don't, it did not reach the cultural saturation point of Adventure Time, which would be a hard thing to match. So they were taking some pretty big swings, but now they are, the word over at Netflix is, adult wise, that they're looking more for like family sitcoms, not, I was the EP of Inside Job, which is not terrifically different than Rick and Morty or Futurama in its, if you had to do a quick elevator pitch. But it launched and did really good when it launched, really well. But even though it did well, I believe it got canceled because it's just not it's not the business they want to be in right now. They want to be in, they want shows like Bob's Burgers that they can run for 4 seasons and then make a movie of.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to copy that Fox Disney thing, and Fox and Disney wouldn't make an Inside Job, a show where they're all swearing and they're like critical of the government.
Interesting. Well, because obviously then there's the whole thing where there's always reboots, remakes, and then there's always the live action adaptations of all these classic Disney movies too that they keep doing. So yeah, and I guess like you just alluded to, that's more geared toward family oriented, I guess, in this case. But yeah, but there's also always going to be like these long running animated adult like they're going on forever, like Family Guy as well. Like they just keep going and going. So I don't know.
That's why like kids, you need to keep your kids babysat often with these shows, but adults don't need to be babysat. Like if you water down the quality of adult animation, they'll just go and watch something different. Or I mean, it would also be great to turn the TV off and go take a walk outside.
Yeah, that's fair. Definitely, but that's the thing. Like, there's so much content out there. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, kids can't just wander out of the house. It's frowned upon. But if you're watching some adult, watered down animated show, adults could just leave the house whenever they want.
You'd be like, that's enough.
A lot of them have cars. They can drive to a place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Oh my gosh. So, I did also want to ask you about like Comic Cons and that kind of fun stuff, because I got the pleasure of meeting you at LA Comic Con. What's been like your favorite experiences like at fan conventions, stuff like that?
Yeah, my favorite BoJack was really big in Latin America. It really connected with I know for certain the people of Mexico, and that was really amazing. Yeah, like my favorite thing was going down to Mexico, and I remember the first time I went down there, I wasn't supposed to do it. I was just supposed to give a talk, and then I just kind of sat down and started drawing BoJacks for whoever wanted one, and then a huge line formed, and it was impromptu, and the people who were running it were very happy, but they were also like, how do we manage this situation? And I was like, at first I was drawing BoJacks with Sharpie pens, and I was like coloring his mane in black and everything, um, all the black parts. And then they came up to me and said, you know, Mr. Hollingsworth, we have counted the amount of people, and then we have timed how long you are taking with each person, and we did the multiplication. And if you continue at the rate that you are continuing at, you will have to be here for 6 hours to draw a drawing for every one of the people. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I just started not coloring in the mains and doing quick drawings.
Oh wow, that's too funny. Oh
I
my
just
God.
I thought that was a very matter of fact, plain way. It was very appreciated. Like, we have counted the people, we have taken approximation of your time per person,
Mhm.
but they kept thanking me thank you so much for doing that. That was so amazing. Like, for you to give your time. But I was like, you know, this is so amazing that people would even want this drawing of this character that I work with. Um, like, it was as for whatever joy I was giving them, like these people were paying back to me tenfold, because it was like just obviously such a fun career thing to have so many people want to queue up to have a drawing that I did, you know. So yeah, that experience was, and then I think like the people down in Latin America are just so excited that you're down there. Like, because of that, my experience there, like whenever I go to a Comic Con or a WonderCon or whatever, I always have a Sharpie marker in my pocket in case anybody wants a drawing, but nobody ever wants a drawing. I'm like, oh,
Uh-huh.
well, I have my Sharpie marker.
Like ready to go on. No, but you're right. It is all about like the joy and connection and just love and passion for these characters, for these shows that people can relate to, that people can just appreciate. So yeah, it's really wonderful. That's like, you get the value just as much as they get it from you. So yeah, it's really sweet.
Yeah.
Um, I asked this question when I interviewed Aaron Long as well. So I'd love to know for you,
Who's
Mike,
that?
do you have an all-time favorite cartoon character?
An all-time favorite cartoon character, Gonzo from the
Ah,
Muppet is my favorite across
hell yeah.
all media, books, film, TV.
That's a good one.
I mean, I loved The Simpsons, but I mean, my favorite cartoon character of all time, and he went through such um a metamorphosis over time, is like Daffy Duck.
Hmm.
He started out wacky and nutty, like completely crazy, and then he was so serious and so conniving towards the end, and like, but nothing would ever work out for him. He's so quick to anger and everything. He went from being so nutty to so angry. Like, Bugs Bunny was always, they kept him and he pretty much was Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
But Daffy Duck really went through a big change. He was older than Bugs Bunny by like 4 or 5 years or something. But so they made more cartoons
Oh.
during that era with him. Yeah, it was just Porky and Daffy for a long time. Um, but yeah, cartoon characters, it would be Daffy Duck. I also really love like Alice in Wonderland. If Alice in Wonderland, the Disney movie, is kind of like a sketch. It's like if Saturday Night Live made a a Disney movie, because it's so segmented. Like
Yeah.
each part, it's like uh and your host, Alice. And then Alice is in every
Cool.
sketch because she's meeting, like, it's like like the March Hare and the Mad Hatter are like Wayne and Garth or whatever. Like she comes into all these different skits, as this character, and then kind of goes out of them, and then that skit was over. Like she doesn't care. It's like,
Mhm.
in more sophisticated Disney movies, like this character, like what is Alice's journey?
Right.
She's just kind of confused all the way through.
Hmm.
She doesn't have like a big journey where she learns like, I, you know, I was a I was a scared person when I got here and afraid of the world. And now I'm a stronger young lady and I'm gonna take the world by storm. She has no journey.
That's true. It's just all nonsense. That's funny because that's my sister's favorite Disney movie. She loves the caterpillar. Who are you? She loves that. My sister, like the
Yeah.
animation of it. But you're
And
right.
that's like a sketch too.
It's
And
true.
he's
And
like a sketch character.
that's a really unique way of looking at it. 'Cause even of course the Cheshire Cat too. And you're right, because the whole thing is just a dream. And for me personally, like I love the animation of that movie, but you're right. There's no like emotional journey where she learns anything. It's just like, oh, she was daydreaming. Like, don't daydream. Is that like the lesson there? It's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like those BoJack episodes where it's like in the end, ah, you
Right.
were just daydreaming.
Right. It's like, there you go. There was that. I love how that came full circle. It's fantastic. Listen, Mike, it's been such an absolute pleasure chatting with you. My last question I always like to ask is if you have any advice, could be life advice, advice for people trying to break into the industry, anything at all.
Yeah, my advice would be like if you do go to school, be real nice to your coworkers or your students because they're going to become your coworkers, your fellow students. Like you will get your first jobs by one of your classmates recommending you. So sometimes you might want to fuss or fight with them, but it's kind of better. I mean, if somebody's really taking advantage of you, feel free to stick up for yourself, but sometimes it's really good to try to be personable and friendly because these people will recommend you. And we've seen people get drummed out of the industry because they're just awful. Like eventually somebody's like, I just this person is so talented, but I just cannot work with them. They're just terrible. Because it's animation industry, we make all these cartoons that go all around the world, but it's a pretty small industry. And we all talk to each other. We all kind of know each other. Like if I don't directly know somebody, like I know somebody who knows them, and it's all very gossipy and stuff. So it's good to keep it kind of cool, which is a lesson I had to learn myself too, because coming from stand-up comedy, I was a little bit more like would shoot from the hip and be overly sardonic or just kind of snarky. And then I was like, oh, these animation people, they're a little bit more delicate than not just stand-up comics in the back of a club. Um, so yeah, just be good. That would be it.
Listen, that's a very important lesson we all need to hear too. Like just be good to each other too. Um,
Because everybody else will talk behind your back.
yeah, oh my God. Yeah, right. Oh goodness. That's a lesson I've always been told too. Like in terms of with the writing industry trying to break into that, like just don't be an asshole. As simple as that. Like the
Yeah.
fact that has to be said is what's sad, I feel, but there you go.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are so talented that you have to be so talented to be an asshole and still get
Mhm.
work, but that'll run out
Yeah.
because
It's,
people like we're working in animation, but we kind of just want to go to work, have a pleasant day, maybe go out to lunch with some friends, but then go home and be with our family. That we don't want to be caught up in all your drama and bullshit.
absolutely.
Getting
Yeah.
like emails at like 7 p.m. like, oh, Peter just we just got word that Peter called somebody a name during work, and now we gotta call them a Philistine, and we have to take care of this.
Oh my God.
Gonna
See.
hop into a Zoom at 8 p.m. to talk about what we're gonna do tomorrow because yeah, you can't control your language.
Right. See, so don't be like that. Like lesson learned. But please, Mike, let everyone know where they could find you on social media and if there's anything else you'd like to promote.
Yeah, I am stuffed animals at stuffed animals, stuffed with one extra F. Stuffed animals, where I put drawings and stuff. And I did this really great show at when I was at Netflix with my buddy James Bowman for Charlie Brooker from Black Mirror. It's an interactive Tex Avery cartoon that James and I wrote called Cat Burglar. It's like if you could play a Tex Avery cartoon. So it has like a runtime of something like 10 minutes, but we created like a almost 2 hours of animation for all these different scenarios and stuff. So check that out. Netflix just plopped it up there without much without much notice. So not that many people got to see it as we could, and the quality is fantastic. It really does look like a 1949 MGM cartoon. The art direction by Avner Geller, and not only art direction, but he was in charge of like the compositing. So it has like dust and scratch and like a soft blur, like it's from a actual film from 1949. And the music by Chris Willis, who does all the Mickey shorts. This was a surprise to me, but he recently just won his first ever Emmy for Cat Burglar. I would have thought he would have had so many Emmys he's done those Mickey shorts for about a decade, those new Mickey shorts.
Oh, cool. Mm-hmm.
But he strove to kind of recreate the music of Scott Bradley, who did all of those Tom and Jerry and Tex Avery cartoons at MGM, and his fellow composers must have really appreciated how much he nailed it, which he did, and they awarded him an Emmy for it. So check it out.
And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to visit storytellingsaga.com for all places to listen and where to follow on social media. And as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next episode, I'm excited to interview animation production designer and painter Carol Wyatt. She's worked on everything from The Simpsons to SpongeBob SquarePants and many other shows. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.